Welcome to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast. Each week, we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration, and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years. Hello, my name is Ruth Lue-Quee, your host for this week's TTS Talking Early Years podcast. I'm an educational consultant, also known as My Mummy Teacher, founder of LMT Play, and I'm passionate about inclusion and play. Throughout this series, we'll be discussing a range of topics aimed at supporting SEN in the early years, inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. I'm delighted to introduce Professor David Daley as today's guest. Welcome to the podcast, David. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Nice to be back, and I'm looking forward to continuing our discussions about early years.
Absolutely, I can't wait. I feel like we could talk for hours. They're going too quickly. Before we get started, just in case anybody hasn't caught up on the last two, could you please just give us a quick introduction about yourself?
So I'm Professor David Daley. I'm Professor of Psychological Intervention and Knowledge Exchange and Head of Applied Psychological Practice at Nottingham Trent University. I am a child psychologist by training, and I have in the past specialised in the preschool period, so looking at childhood development before they end up with you in early years.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So in this episode today, we're going to be focusing on de-escalation and crisis management. So previously, we've spoken a lot about proactive strategies that we can do to support children, but we're going to think now when they are at that point of crisis management, how can we best support them to try and avoid escalation even further as well? And I think one of the first things that's really important to do is recognise the early warning signs. So what early warning signs might we see that are identifying to us that perhaps a child is distressed, they're being triggered, and that their behaviour might be about to escalate?
So I think there are lots of early warning signs. The challenge for the early years practitioner is to spot the early warning signs for different types of children that might lead to different types of meltdowns. So you can kind of divide early warning signs into two different types. So there's the ones that are externalizing, and there are ones that are internalizing. So the externalizing warning signs are children who are becoming loud and disruptive and disobedient, maybe interfering with other children, banging things on the table, shouting out. So that's a pretty clear early warning sign that a child is becoming so dysregulated that they're no longer able to self-soothe or self-regulate. And so now it only just takes a tiny little thing, another child brushing up against them by accident, somebody else, putting their hand up before them to tip them over the edge. And then you have the child ends up having a tantrum. Mm-hmm. You also get more internalizing signs. So children who are so dysregulated that the only way that they can cope is to withdraw. So a normally quite chatty child might actually go very quiet, go very silent, actually totally lost looking at the window, non-responsive. They may be engaging in behaviours that are self-soothing, so they may be caressing themselves, they may be starting to rock a bit. They may also be engaging in very minor but nevertheless quite distressing forms of self-harm. They may be pinching themselves, or they may be hitting their hand on their head, because that's how they try and deal with their intense sense of dysregulation.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we notice these sorts of signs, what is the best thing that we can do? What's our role as a practitioner?
So I think the role of the practitioner is to take action. So if people have watched the previous episodes, they'll know that one of the kind of key take-home themes of all of this is that we want to try and change children's environmental experiences as a way of helping them to better manage their behavior. So this is a situation where the child isn't managing in the environment that they're in. And so we want to remove them from that environment to give them a better chance of regulating their behavior. Now, in the past, we've done that in very overt ways. We've had kind of timeout strategies, but timeout's really, really punitive. And it's not very helpful for children who are not necessarily responsible for their lack of regulation. We're talking about SEND children. We're talking about children in early years. We really are years away from being able to say, actually, you should be able to do this. And so we don't want to use a timeout strategy unless we absolutely have to. Sometimes children may have tantrums. They may be a threat to themselves. They may be a threat to other children. You may have to just exclude them, remove them, and take them to a cloakroom or something for their safety. But really, in de-escalation, what we want to have is a much softer, more effective, and more collaborative approach. And that approach is normally called calm down. Mm-hmm. And so what you would do for your SEND children is you would have discussed with them in advance that they may at times need to calm down. And you would have identified for them what you'd call a calm down spot. And a calm down spot is something that they can sit on. And it could be anything. It could be a tea towel, a headscarf, it doesn't really matter, a piece of carpet. And that would be available. So for instance, it's a tea towel or a headscarf. That would be in the child's tray. And when you see that the child is really struggling and you see those overt behavioral signs that the child really is in distress, if you take action straight away, you would recruit the child's attention and you'd say, I think we need to calm down. And the language here is really important, because if you say to somebody, you need to calm down, that's a demand. And it's also kind of blaming. And both of those things are really triggering for a child who's already in distress. So by using very careful language and saying, we need to calm down, we need to go get your calm down spot, you're actually really offering the child an olive branch. And so you're saying, I'm going to help you to calm down. And so you take the child to their tray, you would get their calm down spot out, and then you would take them to somewhere for them to sit on the calm down spot. Now, how you do that would very much depend on how lucky you are as an early years practitioner, how lucky you are in terms of the geography of your classroom, and also how much help and support you have. So ideally, if there's help in the classroom, they might take the child out and they could calm down in the cloakroom, or, if you have a little art preparation room off your classroom. But it may be that and increasingly these days, it may be that there is nobody else, it's just you. And so the child has to calm down in the corner of the classroom. But you would sit them down, and then for as long as you can possibly afford to invest, you would stay with that child, and you would do anything you think that would help that child to calm down. Mm-hmm. So that might just be holding them. And again, depending on different types of children, they might just need to be held very lightly. For children with high levels of autistic-like difficulties, they quite often like really tight hugs. So they might need a really squeezy, tight hold hug. It could be that you tell them a joke, you tell them a story, you sing them a song, you ask them some curious questions. You told me you got a new kitten a couple of weeks ago. What's the kitten been up to? I bet the kitten's been really naughty. And you get the child thinking about something else rather than whatever it is that was upsetting them. And then you talk the child down to a point where they're calm enough, where you feel they might be able to calm down further on their own. So just putting them on the calm down spot, when you're totally dysregulated, it might not be sufficient. I do appreciate that while this is great advice, there may be early years practitioners listening who's saying, well, that sounds great, but actually, who's looking after the other 27 or 28 children? So it will be a judgment call about how much time you have to invest. But I would certainly recommend that you invest a minute or two in it, because you will gain that time back throughout the rest of the day by having a child who's much more invested in learning and less likely to create other difficulties.
Yeah, absolutely. So much. There's so many things that you spoke about there that are so useful. What you mentioned about the language that we're using and how important it is for us to be calm when we're communicating. And actually, if somebody said to me, you just need to calm down, that's going to trigger me even more. I'm going to be the least calm person now. You said that to me. And it's the same for our children, isn't it? what's really important to do is exactly what you said. It's that supporting them to regulate, and then being able to relate to them and acknowledge how they're feeling, and how you're feeling is absolutely okay to feel like that. And then I think one of the important things that we can do, even with our toddlers, it doesn't, we can start doing this when they're so young. We're just going to do it through narrating, is reasoning with them and trying to bring in some sort of strategies where we can say, well, this happened, it caused this. Next time, when you're feeling like this, you can do this and I can do this. And hopefully we're going to be able to support you to reduce those moments of escalation. So what sort of agreed safe intervention techniques would you say are appropriate? And how can we ensure that they are being put in place and that everybody is safe, so the child and the staff as well?
So the safe techniques really do depend, of course, on the behaviour. And at the end of the day, there are a small number of times when children in the early years do engage in very unsafe behaviours, unsafe for the other children, but occasionally unsafe for the teacher. And in situations where you have a child who is, has very poor emotion regulation and gets very aggressive and angry very early, and when that happens, it normally means that they're growing up in households where somebody is also doing that. So children don't just spontaneously develop like that. They have to grow up in households where very poor emotion regulation is modeled, and aggressive, angry, violent outbursts are normalized as an appropriate response. But in that situation, you probably do need to remove the child from the classroom as quickly as possible. And it would be about just taking them out into the playground, into the corridor or the cloakroom or whatever. There's very little else that you can do, because leaving them in the classroom where there are lots of other children and there are lots of other things that could be used as basically quasi weapons or missiles, it's impossible to make that environment safe. But really what we're trying to achieve in early years through the calm down is good anticipation by the early years practitioner, and using the calm down spot as a way of promoting self-regulation. And what we're really aiming for by promoting self-regulation is that by the time we send them up to Key Stage 1, we have a child who can identify themselves the fact that they're getting dysregulated, and they have permission to go and get their calm down spot and to go and calm down themselves. So essentially, the early years practitioner has to put in all the hard work, and the Key Stage 1 teacher will reap all the benefits of having a child who would have been very difficult and disruptive, but actually has already learned a really important life lesson about, I do get dysregulated, I can recognize the signs of my dysregulation, and I know I need to kind of remove myself a little bit from the group I'm working with, the sheet we're working on, and go and sit on my calm down spot for a few minutes. And that's a really important lifelong lesson. And if we can get all young children at that level, developmentally, they will be, very, very different for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I love that point. I think you've made two really good points there as well. Number one, early years practitioners definitely have, I would say, the hardest job. They put the groundwork in for absolutely everybody else and for all of these children to thrive 100%. And they're so skilled as well without even realizing, because they are the ones that are instilling these skills within these children, and that in itself is so amazing. And I also think what's really effective and what our practitioners and listeners can take away today is essentially, I'm going to summarize it as like rehearse that calm down spot on a good day, rehearse that all the time, so that then our children are able to use that when they need it. And as they grow and as they develop and they progress through the school, they'll be able to just do it really independently. But we've got to teach them how to do that within the early years as well. Thank you ever so much for joining me today. That's been a really, really great talk.
A pleasure as always. Thank you.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to our guest, David, for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Ruth Lue-Quee, and Professor David Daley. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your settings and links to relevant resources.